Yes? Senator Rodriguez is next. Senator Rodriguez?
Thank you, Mr. President and members.
What purpose?
To ask the senator some questions.
Do you yield?
Yes, I yield.
Senator Creighton, you and I had a discussion when this bill came before the committee, as you recall, and we differed on how we see the significance of monuments, certain monuments, and what they mean, as well as the distinction between remembering history and honoring history. We kind of talked about that at the committee hearing. When you laid out your bill, you made a reference to Texas leading the nation in certain monuments being removed. Isn't your bill mainly about monuments that glorify the Confederacy?
No, I mean, as we saw, Senator Rodriguez, and again, I'm about, and I understand your reference to Confederate monuments, and I'm here today to say that we need to educate, not celebrate what they stood for. But my bill speaks to even James Hogg's monument on the University of Texas campus that was removed along with Robert E. Lee in the middle of the night and other monuments, and then now it's by university preference, and now it's going back to being placed on campus.
Well, that's a Confederate monument.
But it's going back to being placed on campus, so this will allow for a process that will be more resolute and have more public weigh-in than we've had in the past. So I appreciated your comments in committee in our exchange on the tier system and on the merits of the bill, and I think we all worked in committee to make it a better bill.
Well, what is the distinction between, as you put it in the committee, between balancing history and celebrating history?
The distinction is understanding and recognizing the good and the bad and the ugly of our past and teaching from it, as we see on Capitol grounds. When I come up to the Capitol in the summer with my 9-year-old son and I throw the football with him on the Capitol grounds, and we see all the kids on summer break with their parents and their families and grandparents and aunts and uncles and cousins enjoying the Capitol complex and taking this walk through time, all those families, and I visit with them, they are educating their kids and grandkids on parts of our past that we would not celebrate.
So we celebrate the Confederacy.
That's what that's what I just said to you. That's not something that we would celebrate, but we will educate from it instead of tearing it down and ignoring it and possibly creating a situation where our kids don't learn from it.
Well, maybe you and I would say that we're not celebrating the Confederacy, but a lot of those witnesses that came and testified on support of your bill made it very clear to me, as I heard it, that we needed to celebrate our past history, the Confederacy in particular. Some people they claimed relatives that fought in the Confederacy. And so that's why I'm asking you about, this business of balancing history, as you put it, and celebrating history, in this case, the Confederacy.
Well, there were witnesses that testified that mentioned family members from generations ago that fought for the Confederacy or served in the military, but there was one witness in particular, Senator Rodriguez, that was awful, and he was towards the end of the group, and quite frankly, we none of us can ever predict or defend against those that are not right in the head to show up at any of these hearings, but the fact that 1 out of 30 million decided to do so, there's always one.
Well, and I recall that person. I think he identified himself as being a member or even the head of the Texas Nationalist Association or group, as he called it.
I don't think that was the same person. I'm talking about the person that used the awful rhetoric that Senator West mentioned. And I sent that person a letter to his house pulling committee records, denouncing that rhetoric and all that he stood for.
But there was a witness there who identified himself as being associated with the white nationalist organization.
You know, there on any of these bills, there's all kinds that show up, but that's not what we're talking about today. Senator Rodriguez, is a process for monuments that already exist. Anybody that can read a caption or a title or a heading that somehow in whatever state of mind they're in can show up in this public building and stand for whatever they want to, but they were irrelevant with the spirit of the bill and the framework that it allows.
Let me ask you this. Do you disagree or do you deny that the Confederacy was organized under the ideals of white supremacy?
I think we've all made that conclusion long before today, Senator Rodriguez, but with what we have before us is we own the history that we own. And so I'm simply providing for a process with public input and working with you on this floor through the mechanics of the bill to make sure that we not only own that history going forward, but that we don't hide from it. We don't erase it. I think that sends the wrong message to kids, and I think it's not the message that you and I as legislators have laid the groundwork for in the way that this Capitol complex lays out, and the journey and the walk through time that you can experience on these grounds.
Well,
and in doing so, of course, I would denounce that. The fact that you would even ask me that question,
it needs to be
I
asked.
think, and I've never said this before, but I think that's absolutely ridiculous that you would ask me if I personally agree with that. So, of course, the answer is yes. I agree
that the Confederacy was organized around the ideal of white supremacy, and that's commendable that you do that. But the point I want to make,
the people of the time, of course, are stood for things that I've said several times today is the ugly part of our past, and so. But my point is that we own that we don't erase it.
Well, you say we don't erase it. I mean, monuments are an expression of a community. If it's at the local level, an expression of the community's feelings towards a historical...
Members, we've had a very respectful discussion so far. Do not let it get personal.
Thank you,
All right.
Mr. President.
Either one, do not let it get personal.
All right.
Or I will stop the debate.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the local level, the monuments, would you not agree, are an expression of that community's feelings towards some historical figure or some historical event? And that's what those monuments express?
It very well could be, and through the framework of the bill, if there is current sentiment to balance out history, there's a grant program in place to allow for history to be balanced in a way that local community would see fit. If the monument does not reflect what the municipality or county wants going forward, then the public will have a say and a vote on that very issue. So there's no will, public will that's disenfranchised in the legislation.
Do you think that the expression through those monuments by communities is a protected right under the First Amendment, free speech?
There's been, certainly Supreme Court rulings that have been very clear that as political subdivisions of the state can, lay a framework down that affects the policies that city otherwise preferred to be different.
No, but the Supreme Court decisions like Pleasant Grove, you may be familiar with, that say that cities can express their First Amendment rights in different forms. And I'm asking, in this case, are you not concerned that your bill that would change the way cities deal with monuments, whether they erect them or whether they want to remove them, does your bill not infringe on their First Amendment rights of expression? If they conclude, or even, for example, what happened here in the Capitol, the Preservation Board and the governor concluded and agreed with Eric Johnson, Representative Johnson and others, like myself, that that particular plaque honoring the Confederacy distorted the history of why Texas seceded from the Union, as was pointed out by Senator West in his reading of the Texas Declaration of Causes.
Senator Rodriguez, you jumped from First Amendment rights of a city to a plaque being taken down by the Preservation Board.
Well,
what is your question?
Well, here's the connection. Here's the question. I'm saying that if a city decides that they want to remove a monument, such as was done here at the Capitol on that plaque, because that monument is distorting history or misrepresenting history, does a city not have that right under the First Amendment to do that?
So I'm hearing a couple of different questions, so I'll answer it three ways. Yes, the city has First Amendment rights. Yes, the Supreme Court has said that the state can step in because the city is a political subdivision of the state, and it's not infringing upon the city's First Amendment rights to lay down rules or statutes that affect that city going forward with regard to monuments. And third, for the plaque that was on the wall and removed by the Preservation Board, I would say the same answer that I did a little bit earlier with our exchange with Senator Miles, which is that I feel like that plaque should have been moved, that the consideration should have moved through a committee process where the public had the right to weigh in the hearings process, and that as the plaque was originally erected by the legislature, that it would have been considered for removal by the legislature. So those are my three answers to what I think were your 3 points or questions.
Would your bill have prevented the governor and the Preservation Board from removing the plaque?
The plaque was over 25 years old.
Yes.
And it's on the Capitol Complex grounds, and so it would have called for the legislature to vote on the removal of the plaque. And so as I mentioned, that my preference, that's the reason why I just mentioned my preference and the path that I followed, the committee process and the legislature voting, is because my preference in the answering your question is exactly consistent with my bill. That's not a coincidence. So of course that's my preference, because that's the bill that's before us. That's the way it lays out. And yes, that's what I would have preferred.
Well, is this, as long as we're talking about cities, another one of those unfunded mandates, when you say that if in fact the people of the city want to remove a monument, it's got to be done through an election? You say it's not enough for the representatives, the people they elect to city council, to make that decision. It's got to go to a vote. If it's got to go to a vote for an election, you got to have an election. There's costs associated with elections. There's costs associated with having to publicize the nature of the election, the issue, and so forth. So are we again imposing an unfunded mandate on local government under this bill?
We're allowing the public to vote at the municipal level, giving them a greater, bolder voice, and we're providing through the bill a funded solution to balance history, if that be the case, through the program under the Texas Preservation Trust Fund Act. And so I would say, as Dallas spent over $400,000 to remove Robert E. Lee's monument, that they could have used that $400,000 to put up a General Grant or a Lincoln monument, and then relied on the funding solutions for municipalities that's located in my legislation.
All right, but you haven't really answered the question about an unfunded mandate imposing costs on local government. Don't you agree that this bill does that?
My answer was that when you balance whatever cost it might be to hold an election with the fact that the public would have a greater say and a greater voice in the outcome of the city that they live within, that burden and benefit comparison is a no-brainer.
Do we not live in a representative democracy?
We do.
Well, the representatives are us in the case of the state, and at the local level it's the city council members. The people elect us to make the decisions, and if we don't do the correct thing, then they can vote us out of office.
And we respect that representative democracy and the spirit and the intent of the bill. As it's stated in the bill, if the monument is under 25 years old, then that, through representative democracy, that city council can make those decisions. If we've seen some of the emotion behind some of the older monuments considered, then beyond that representative democracy would be an election that would be held by the very same people that sent those councilmen and women into office. They would be able to have a greater say. And so we always have to strike a balance when we craft legislation. And I agree with you, there's never a perfect draft, but I believe through the committee process and through public input that this is the best piece of legislation following the process of that input.
Because your premise is, as you stated at the committee, and here as you presented your bill, that we should not forget our past, our history. And you connect that to these monuments, that if you remove them, then we are intending to forget our past. Is that how I understand your position?
That's right. I don't believe Texas should be a place where we remove, destroy, and eradicate the ugly from our past, that we face it head on and that we educate from that, building forward a better place for you and I and our families to live.
Senator, consider how historical monuments have been treated in other parts of the world, right? And because I think this is instructive with regard to this bill. Do you believe that the Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union should have retained their monuments honoring Stalin for his actions?
Senator Rodriguez, I can't speak to what happened with the history of Russia and monuments in their past. I'm just saying from what we have before us, it's a slope that I don't think we need to venture down. I think we need to teach from our past, educate from our past, and I have full confidence in the citizens of the state of Texas to accurately and constructively teach their kids and grandkids as they would see fit. And that confidence is paramount in the spirit of this legislation.
Well, I'm asking that question because it ties into the point that you made about not forgetting history. And my point is, has history been forgotten due to the removal of those monuments in the Soviet Union?
My answer prior was I can't speak to the history of the Soviet Union. I can just talk about what we're considering here.
Let's talk about Germany.
Well, it's predictable that my answer might be the same if we jump to Germany.
Well, let me ask you this. Do you believe that Germany should have retained monuments glorifying Hitler and the SS, and that as a result of their destruction, as happened after the war, the Germans are not aware of the events from 1933 through 1945?
Senator Rodriguez, I think that you're still talking about Confederate monuments, as I'm just going to surmise that it's implied in your questioning. And so Hitler was denounced and hated by every successor ever that came forward into office or power for Germany following. In our history of our Civil War, even as I mentioned that as General Grant accepted, and I can't believe we're dredging through states' rights versus slavery and Civil War, even conversation still right now, but as General Lee submitted his surrender at Appomattox to General Grant, as General Lee turned to walk away, said to all of his men, and today is the day that those rebels are again our countrymen. That was not what happened in Germany. That was absolutely not what happened in Germany. So the Soviet Union and Germany and all these examples...
I'm sorry, Senator Creighton, I hate to interrupt. Senator Rodriguez, I'd like to keep focus on this bill, and by prior agreement, I want to remind both parties, by a handshake of prior agreement on Friday to postpone the bill, we said there would be 2 hours of discussion. To the Democrats, I will subtract any time that the Republicans have spoken, which was only Senator Seliger so far. But Senator Rodriguez, you have more Democrats who want to speak, and there's about
I'm down to my
20
last
minutes
question.
total left.
Down
That
to
was
my
by
last
handshake
question.
agreement by both parties who decided not to do this on Friday and to limit the debate on this suspension of the regular order of business to no more than 2 hours.
I understand that, Mr. President. My last question is that you have included a provision granting the Attorney General's office the authority to prosecute violations of this proposed statute with civil penalties. And I noticed that the fine increases a lot from the first violation,
Right.
$1,000, to the second violation, $25,000. What happens when an entity, a small city, is unable to pay the fine?
I don't expect a small city to violate this provision because it's very clear, and their very competent city attorneys will, I would imagine, advise them as such. But, you know, there's a legal process through this framework. If a resident petitions the Attorney General to seek a mandamus, and there's a court proceeding, and a judge will decide exactly how the process will play out. You and I, we talked about the bill extensively in committee, and the enforcement arm of it, or the fine, didn't come up when you and I were visiting, but it's got to have some sort of enforcement.
Well, I understand that, and it seems to me like an incredible jump, and it might be I hope you're right, but I think it may be a problem for small communities that have statutes and monuments, streets, and things that are covered under your bill. But thank you for your patience, and thank you for answering the questions.
I certainly appreciate your thoughtful questions, Senator Rodriguez. I always enjoy working with you, and if there are consequences like that in the outcome of the legislation, I'll work with you next session on it.
And I certainly want to add that I didn't mean to get personal with you. I was intending to try to get to some clarity on how you are interpreting the need for this statute in terms of preserving our past history and so forth.
No offense taken at all. I completely I have great respect for your advocacy.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator.